Welcome, students, to another video. I just wanted to very briefly go over the research paper. Because this is an English class, and if we were in person, we'd be doing a lot of this in class, but then a lot would be expected of you at home as well. But for you guys, just like I said in my last video, most of the onus, most of the responsibility is going to be on you. So you need to make sure that you are going through these steps and that you understand this research paper quite well. In lesson one, you were supposed to read the research paper overview. Now, history tells me that many students, if there is not an assignment that they have to do right away for it, they don't do it. The problem with that is this is a major part of your grade. I believe it's worth 200 points, but there's also smaller assignments associated with it, like the rough draft and other things like that. So it makes up a big chunk of your score for the year. This research paper is due sometime in Unit 5, like towards the beginning of it. And typically, not perfectly, but typically, a unit will take about 2 weeks, sometimes a week and a half to fully cover. So it's towards the tail end of reading The Great Gatsby. Now, you might look at that on the course guide and say to yourself, well, it's not due yet. I got a really long time. I don't have to worry about it. Again, a research paper, especially this size, especially with this much research that's needed, because you need 8 sources total, you want to get started right away. Now, the course does coach you through doing it. It'll have you do different things for it each week, so that way you are prepared and that way you can be responsible. But you really need to keep up with some of the stuff that's not like an attached assignment. For example, in lesson one, last week, the first day of class, you should have read all of this research paper overview that you see on my screen right now. This is on Brightspace, it's right there for you. You also should have taken a look at the rubric as well. If you didn't do that, please go back and do that. But I will very briefly hit on some of the main components here, so just follow along with me. So, ultimately, your goal is to become an expert on a specific decade in United States history, anytime between 1900 to 2010. So, for those of you that are interested in like earlier American history, you might want to choose 1900 to 1910, 1910 to 1920, so on and so forth. If you want something that's a little bit more contemporary or newer, 2000 to 2010 would work well. 1990 to 2000 would also work well. But you don't want to go after 2010, so you can't do basically any time period in your life. Um, when you are looking at being an expert in that decade, you need a total of 8 sources, but those 8 sources need to talk about 3 different things. One of the topics you discuss in your paper needs to be what we'll call hard news. It needs to be things about the politics of that time, the economy, and major news events, that kind of like history stuff that you would learn in a history class. The other topic should be more cultural. This is everything from movies, music, entertainment, fashion. Obviously, the more contemporary you go, so like if you're doing 2000 to 2010, you will have a lot about movies and music that you can potentially write about, because some of those people that were performing, some of those movies are still relevant today. So you know that. But if you chose 1900 to 1910, you're really not going to have movies in that regard. But there's certainly going to be fashion. There's certainly going to be different forms of entertainment, through books, through magazines, newspapers, etc., etc. And then you need to choose one topic that's kind of your choice between the two. So if you want to do another hard news, then you do that. If you want to do another cultural thing, you do that. My assumption for many people, they choose to do the cultural aspect kind of twice because some people just find that more interesting. But if you really like history, then go ahead and do the history piece. So you see this nice little image right here that kind of shows you the 3 rings of American culture, American hard news, and then kind of your choice between the two. It could be culture, it could be hard news, and all of this is going to form what your research paper is on. Again, you're an expert in a 10-year, a decade span of time between 1900 and 2010. Now, as part of your paper, your title, what it says right in the middle, that's just like you choose creatively to come up with a title for your decade. So we know that as we're reading The Great Gatsby, a lot of F. Scott Fitzgerald's work takes place in what's known as the Jazz Age. So that would kind of be his decade of what he would call it and what other historians and other people call it. You're going to choose something different. Even if you do that same time period, you can choose something different. So for example, if we were doing like 2020 to 2030, which we're not, it's not something that you can do. Also, half of that decade hasn't happened yet. But if this was 2030 and I'm looking back and I wanted to be an expert on 2020 to 2030, I might say something like 2020 to 2030, the decade of artificial intelligence. Something like that, right? So that's what you want to do in terms of the title, and the title is kind of the idea that you're going to be proving and providing throughout your entire paper. So, whatever you say it's the decade of, you want to connect all those other ideas together. So, if you are covering the economy during that time, you want to connect it to the idea of the decade that you came up with. So, in my case, if I was doing 2020 to 2030 and I called it the decade of artificial intelligence, I would then take that idea and I would link it towards the economy. How are businesses in that decade of time integrating artificial intelligence into their business plans? How are people investing? How are people getting an education that's affecting the economy as well? So on and so forth. I could also choose to do different major news events like ChatGPT becoming really important. I could talk about the educational landscape and people using AI to teach, using AI to learn. It really changes a lot of things. I could talk about the different medicinal effects that AI could have. I was talking with a science teacher just the other day, and they really think that artificial intelligence and robotics will really take place in lieu of a lot of surgeons for things. Whether or not that'll actually happen in this decade, don't know. But we at least start seeing some of the ideas. I could also then talk about the cultural component of that in that decade that I chose and say, how does AI affect things like movies, like music? It's done it a lot. It's already been in the news for that. For example, the writer strike that took place not that long ago, just maybe a year or two ago at this point, maybe even longer. I don't know. Time's a blur. But that writer strike, a lot of it had to do with AI kind of taking over the writing process of a lot of jobs. And due to that, people were not making as much money because how can there be enough jobs available if production companies start leveraging artificial intelligence to write sequences, to even create videos, and things like that? So, the part of the writer's strike, not all of it, but part of it was certainly protections against the artificial intelligence kind of stealing some jobs. Same thing with movies. We've seen it even recently in music with high profile rappers who have used AI to have a specific sound of another rapper come out in their music and then kind of get sued like, oh, hold on, I wasn't actually on that song. You can't really use my voice. Well, it was AI generating the voice. So notice in both of those categories, I took something that's hard news like the economy, but I still linked it to the decade of artificial intelligence. Then I took the cultural piece and I discussed movies or music, and I linked that again to artificial intelligence, and then I would choose one of my choice. In my case, I would probably do two cultural because I already discussed the movies and I would want to do the music as well, and still linking them to artificial intelligence. So, whatever your title is, needs to be throughout your entire paper. So, please keep that in mind. Now, each one of these really requires a lot of research and it really requires a lot of time. So you need to start now. Please don't wait until you see it on the course guide as due for the rough draft or something and then be like, oh, now I'm going to get started. You're probably not going to do well if you do that. Now, in addition to that, right, you need to make sure that you have reputable sources that you are putting in your paper in MLA format. Uh, the course will go through MLA format. You guys have all been through MLA format before in previous OLO courses, but it's something that you could look up online quite easily, and even AI can help you with, right? You're not taking their ideas, but if you have a source and you're like, hey, can you help me, ChatGPT? Put this in MLA format and teach me how to do it, that's an appropriate use of AI. So make sure that you are finding your sources, make sure that you are quoting them correctly in your work, and never just taking somebody else's ideas. You could take a look at the prompt for yourself. We kind of went over it already in the overview, so I'm not going to read it to you, but that prompt is right there. Emphasis on thesis statement. All of you at this point, I believe, are juniors, so you really should know what a thesis statement is. Again, it's that last sentence of your introduction. Technically, can it be somewhere else in your paper? Yes. Usually in high school, you're taught to put it as the last sentence in your first paragraph. And I specifically look for that. Typically, on almost any rubric for a research paper, there's going to be a spot for thesis statement. So make sure you spend a lot of time formulating that. My recommendation is to actually write that first before writing anything else. Notice too that you need to select 8 sources that are high quality references. These are things that should not just be simple .nets or .coms. You need to be able to see who the author is. They need to be peer reviewed is usually the best. Academic journals are good. Actual news reports are okay. Things like that that I'm sure you guys have all learned about. If you need some help deciding what decade to do with some of the major events, just take a look at the decade overview that's on here. Not going to read this whole thing, but you can take a look for yourself on Brightspace and determine what are you most interested in. If you're interested in World War One, you might want to go to 1910 to 1919. If you're interested in like baseball becoming popular and Babe Ruth, you might want to do this decade of 1920 to 1929. If you want something a little bit more recent, then anything from 80s to 2010 might be interesting for you. If you're interested in like the rise of social media and even YouTube, then 2000 to 2010 would be great for you guys. Again, you could look at what the source requirement are for this. It does break down. You need a minimum of 3 academic websites. You need a minimum of 3 articles. And you need optional items as well here that you can take a look at. So make sure you look at those source requirements carefully and also look at the paper requirements. It is a long paper. All right, so it does take quite a bit of time. It's saying the word count approximately 2,100 to 2,400 words. For the most part, just think of it of pages, 7 to 8 pages in your normal Times New Roman font, something like that. And there you have it. So you could take a look at the rubric on the other content page of Brightspace below this. Actually, we're not going to do it in this video, but make sure you spend some time printing this out, highlighting it. Make sure you know what the requirements of the paper are. And if you have questions, ask me now rather than right before it's due. This is a long paper. This is a big paper. It's worth a lot of your grade. So make sure you spend a lot of time with it. The one warning that I will give, make sure too you do not use AI to write your paper. It will be a significant breach of the academic integrity policy. And if Turnitin is flagging it and showing that more than that 25% or more of your paper is AI generated, it will warrant a discussion. If it's even higher than that, you probably shouldn't even submit it without talking to me first and explaining why it's so high, right? And those of you who use AI know you're using it. So you're definitely going to want to pump the brakes on that because if you still turn it in, and turnitin.com gives me that report and shows me a high percentage is AI generated, then you will be required to redo the entire assignment, and you don't get that long in order to redo it. I have to look at the policy again, but I think it's something like a week, and you're capped at a certain grade that you can get. So even if you do a phenomenal job, on the second attempt without AI, you will not earn an A, and it's going to hurt your grade. So there you have it. There's an overview of the research paper. Hopefully I'm able to help a little bit with that. I know reading a lot of the information can kind of be difficult, and having somebody explain it to you is helpful. So um, yeah, there you have it. If you have questions, please reach out to me. I'm here. You know, guys know my email, and I'll see you in the DQs.